Yo, got a 2013 Dodge Dart in here. This car's making a little clicking noise when you turn the wheel to the right and the left. And when this thing's on the ground, if I have somebody in the car that turns the wheel to the right and the left and I just put my hand on this coil spring, I can feel the noise resonating through this coil. And that's telling me that that strut bearing is no good. I got some struts and strut mounts here. And if you can see, here's a strut mount. These things are made to turn. There's a bearing inside of here. It's all plastic cage bearing. And the grease goes bad in these things. A lot of times you can just take them apart and grease them and put them back together. But this thing's got 100,000 miles on it. And normally dealerships and people that want to sell you struts, they want to replace these every 60,000 miles. And the reason being is because these are gas charged. So if I try to take this thing apart, chances are that this strut is just going to fall right down because there's no more gas in the thing. And it's a real bugger to try to fix this without replacing struts. You can get strut assemblies for these, which is the entire system, but most of the strut assemblies are Chinese, and this coil spring is aftermarket, and a lot of times your ride height is wrong when you use aftermarket strut assemblies. So I want to use new strut mounts, new struts, and I want to use the original coil spring to make sure that the ride height is exactly where it was before. There's a couple different ways you can do these struts. You can use these things, which are pretty dangerous. Sometimes they don't work right. Sometimes they fly off and it can really hurt you. You can rent these. At parts stores, they got little better ones, like at Napa and O'Reilly's. They got better ones than this. These are just cheap Harbor Freight ones. I have a wall mount strut assembly I'm going to use. If you're not comfortable with any of this and you try to do this job yourself and you don't want to deal with that and you don't want to use strut assemblies, you could probably just take your struts out and just bring all of this stuff to a mechanic shop and just have them swap it over for you real quick. It doesn't take much. I mean, it's not that big of a job. They'll charge you for it, obviously, but probably not much. Just call around and somebody will probably do it really cheap for you if you're lucky. First thing I'm going to do is get these lug nuts off. They're supposed to be a 19 millimeter, but these lug nuts are all corroded and ruined. They get corrosion underneath these cheesy little caps, and then your socket don't fit. Looks like she just had tires put on here too, and they hammered a bigger socket on these, and well, they never replaced anything. So I'm going to try to use a 20 millimeter because a 19 won't fit. These are cheesy bolts, just like the European cars. So this car might be a little European. As you can see, the worst one looks really pretty. I got a brake hose here that just comes off and an ABS wire. I just want to leave those kind of loose and flopping around. I crank the wheel all the way to the right so I can get at this sway bar link because I got to unbolt that. Once in a while you got to replace them because you end up ruining them. I took a vice grip and ground it down. Be a 10-inch vice grip. And there's no flats on the back of this. I kind of want to be careful too. I don't want to wreck this rubber boot. So I'm going to clamp this down, get it nice and tight. I got a millimeter on here. Sometimes I hit these with MAP gas too if they're really, really rusty. And that came out way too easy. I don't want to take the chance of this axle coming apart on me. I got a 36 millimeter here. I'm going to take the center nut off. Pound that in so it's nice and loose. Now these are a pinch bolt type strut and they're really deep, so they're really hard to get out. I tried to take off this lower ball joint and the bolt was corroded in really bad, and I can't even get the thing to budge. So rather than making a video of something that didn't work, I just kind of deleted all of that. And this lower control arm is some kind of trashy Euro stupidity, just like most of the stuff they engineer and build. That bolt for the lower control arm won't come out because this part of the frame is in the way. I'm going to take this out and then unbolt the lower control arm instead of trying to get this pinch bolt out that won't come out. I could use a pickle fork, but if I use a pickle fork on this, I'm going to destroy this ball joint. I'm going to wreck this boot, and then it's not going to work. So I couldn't find any way of getting that thing out. So I'm just giving up on it. I don't want to wreck the ball joint. I don't want to wreck this boot. And I'm going to try to unbolt everything here so I can slide this out. There's a couple 8mm, both sides of the fender. There's supposed to be a big plastic cover here that got destroyed and ripped out in a snowstorm, which always happens. I'm trying to get this plastic cover off so I can get at stuff. Looks like there's a combination between 7 and 8mm because these people can't make up their mind. Now on this half-retarded 3-piece subframe, I got 3 15mm bolts here. Reverse Torx looks like an E18. Get that stupid thing out of the way. Now I can get at this reverse Torx bolt for this horizontal bushing. Looks like an E20. The nut behind it's held in by a cute little clippy thing. Now for this vertical bushing. That's got an 18mm nut on the top of it. This reverse Torx is an E18. Now for the pinch bolt on this strut, I got like an E14 reverse Torx for this side, and this side's an 18mm. I put something under here to support it just to make sure it doesn't like fall out and wreck something. I'm going to try to pop this thing out of here. Make sure my axle shaft is going in. Kind of get that out of the way. I should be able to slide this thing out of here now. And it's out. I got to be careful though. This brake hose is going to start getting pulled on, and I got to figure out how to prop that up somehow. I found a hole. I just put a ratchet and strap on there like that just to keep these hoses loose. That shaft is okay. It's not pulled out or anything. Now this thing doesn't have any bolts on the tower like every other vehicle in the universe I've seen, because it's got some cheesy plastic Euro retainer thing in here. Apparently you can't reuse these either, so I guess you might be able to. It's kind of debatable though. It came with my mount, so I'm not going to reuse the thing. I'm just going to try to get it out. See what kind of magic I gotta... Oh, there it goes. Ooh, yeah, look at that. And then the strut comes out. What a bunch of cheesy Euro. I got nothing good to say. Haven't used this thing in forever. Man, there was a heck of a mess I had to get this thing out. I'm gonna pretend like I know what I'm doing here. Adjust this thing so it's fairly square. I got this thing on the cheap off of Craigslist from a mechanic shop who got a better one because it's downright dangerous unless you use some vice grips on the bottom of these shafts to hold these in, because sometimes they like to loosen up and slam down on you. Like I say though, I got it on the cheap, so I can't complain. I got a dust cap here that probably didn't do any good for anything, obviously. It's all rusty in there, like the dust cap worked. I guess I'll hit that with some deep creep. 18mm on the thing. Most of these wall mounts are a little different than this old relic. It's got holes here for the bolts that come up, and this one doesn't have any, so this might be dangerous. I should probably put some more vice grips on it or something. I don't want to put too much pressure on it because I need pressure on the strut to be able to get this nut off. I guess it's time for vice grip number 3. Put that one there. Maybe that'll keep it from spinning. You get all of that? You get all of that? Probably didn't get all of that. Vice grip, vice grip, vice grip. Guard. Now I'm just going to buzz this a little at a time and see if that nut's coming up. Okay, it's coming up now. It's past the crush part on the nut. So I'm going to crank this thing down until this strut's just a little bit loose. Right now it's a little loose. See that? I suppose it's an old strut, so I can do this. Time for vice grip number 4. There, I got it. The nut is out. Pull this strut out. Now I can carefully loosen this up. Oh yeah, there's some crunchy spots in there. This is really nice too. That could be a noise. The spring just pushed right up in here and cracked it. No, I don't know what to do here, man. The spring pocket's all goofy. I'm going to put this in a different spot. Stick it in the hole, crank it down. There is a left and a right strut. You don't want to mess that up. And I can swap over this bellow boot and this cheesy little thingamajigger here. Okay, it's up there. The nut is started. Looks like I got everything lined up good enough. You change this up. This nut's a 19 millimeter. And that's tight. I wouldn't get that anything over like 60 foot-pounds, just as a guess. Now I can loosen this up. Make sure that spring's down in the seat right. Yep, this thing won't extend out on its own, so the gas charge is pretty much dead. I was having a little difficult time with the driver's side, so I just turned the camera off. Now I'm onto the passenger side, and I'm going to finish everything up. The steering knuckle's really corroded, and I couldn't get the other strut in. It was really being a bugger. So I got a wire wheel here. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Breathe a little aluminum oxide in your diet. There might be a better way to do that, but that's the best of what I got here. Now that all the dust has settled, I just kind of eyeballed this a little bit, and I got this hole in the strut mount, and I want to make sure that lines up with that hole in the strut tower. It might not be perfect, but I'm just going to make sure it's pretty close. If you have a hard time turning it too, you can just use a socket and a ratchet and hold on to the strut and just turn it. Instead of using a ratcheting strap this time too, I just put the rotor on my jack stand. I spent a whole bunch of time wire wheeling this and making sure it's all nice and smooth. I'm going to hit it with some deep creep just because I can. Hopefully this thing will go in the hole without a fuss. Nice. I'm just going to start my bolt for now. I'm not going to get it tight yet. Now before I go putting that lower control arm in, I'm going to want to jack up on this and put this up in the pocket and make sure that strut mount's lined up right. I jacked it up and pulled it around enough to get that tower pretty square, and that rubber's kind of lined up with that hole. So now I can put this dumb thing on. I got a big huge pair of pliers here. Squish it all down all the way. That's how that thing is supposed to work. I'm pretty sure if it wasn't for gravity, that probably wouldn't last too long and work very well. So don't be jumping any railroad tracks with this car, because you might lose it one day. It might just fly right off of there. Now that I got all that stuff in, I can put in these horizontal and vertical control arm bushings. Make sure my axle's going to line back up. I have this vertical bushing pretty close. I'm just going to take a center punch and stick it in the hole and try to line this thing up so I can get it started in this groove. I think I got it. And I'm going to move over to this horizontal bushing. Got a big old pointy pry bar to line this one up. Now I'm going to start torquing all this junk. Now as far as torquing all this stuff goes, I looked up some torque specs on it, and well, the European lab coat engineers got a hold of this thing and started making up numbers, and some of them I don't believe. If you've been doing this as long as I have, you know not to believe everything you hear. So I'm just going to kind of torque these my way, and some of that stuff might be right, some of it might not. I don't know. You can use your own discretion. You can believe them if you want, but I'm just going to do this my way. The first thing they tell you is not to reuse this pinch bolt, probably because it's a nylock, probably the nut they're talking about. So I'm going to put some red Loctite on it, and I'm going to reuse it. They say torque this to 81 foot-pounds. That might be about right. Then I got a link pin here, 45 foot-pounds. Another thing too, before you tighten this pinch bolt down, you want to make sure that this strut is all the way seated up against this steering knuckle. They say 150 on that. That sounds about right. I'm going to want to hammer these in. The lock nut devices. Make sure the backing plate's not touching and rubbing and making noise. This vertical bushing I'm going to do to about 72 foot-pounds. Then this horizontal lower control arm bushing, I'm going to load the suspension on this. That should be good enough. I'm going to tighten this to 105 foot-pounds. The book will tell you to torque to yield them lower control arm bolts. Then I got this piece of frame jazz. I'm going to say 65 foot-pounds on all of these. And then 45 foot-pounds on these bolts here. And that's it. I just got to put the plastic covers on and put the tires on. You want the bolts on the tires torqued to 95 foot-pounds, and you want to recheck them after about 100 miles because these bolts loosen up on these rims more than any other type of system for a wheel that I've ever known. So be sure to recheck those bolts after 100 miles. Make sure they don't loosen up, especially if you're in the Rust Belt and you got a bunch of rusty, crusty lug nuts or lug bolts. Okay, bye.